All right, well, it's now reached the hour of 3 o'clock. This is the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency for January 8th, that's the minutes, excuse me, for April 11th, 2024. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Chair Tom Stallard.
Present. Vice
Chair Bapu Vaitla.
Present.
Director Rich Landsberg. Present. Director Josh Chapman. Here. Director Angel Barajas from the county is absent. And UC Davis Interim Representative Heather Davis. Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the record reflect then that all are present except Supervisor Barajas? And that allows us to proceed to do our business. So with the quorum, we will now proceed to item 1, which is the approval of agenda and consent items. And these have been previously furnished. Are there any questions on these items? If not, any public comment on these items? No? All right. Our two public have said no. Nobody online either. So time for a motion. Motion, please.
So moved.
Second. Okay. Motion by Director Chapman, seconded by Director Landsberg to approve the consent calendar. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. This is the time for public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda today. I suspect there's none. That's affirmed by...
None received.
Thank you, Michelle. So that'll conclude public comment. That allows us to move on to item 3. The Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency General Manager Update and Operations Manager Update. And so that's Mr. Bush and Stan Grisda. Stan, you're going to start.
Yeah, I'll start. Good afternoon. I'm Tim Bush, the General Manager for the agency. Kind of our usual topics for today: water supply outlook, how we're doing for the year, what the summer is going to look like for us, update on the long-term water supply planning that we're doing, and then Stan will take over and talk about the last 3 items. One thing I'd first like to start with, it didn't quite make our agenda because it just came out yesterday, is I'm not sure if you saw the news yesterday that the federal EPA came out with a new water regulation on PFAS, and PFOA. That's a chemical that's been studied, I think, for a while. It's been used pretty widely since the 1940s. It's in a lot of things. It's in nonstick pans, it's in carpeting, rain jackets, firefighting especially uses a lot of it. EPA regulation came out yesterday, and they set the new maximum limit at the same limit as the detection limit at 4 parts per trillion. So essentially, if you do water quality testing and you detect it at all, you're in violation, which is kind of unique. I don't know if that exists in any other water quality regulations that we have. So I bring that up. That's something that could potentially impact us, maybe not. We've been doing testing in the Sacramento River. The state of California required us to do 4 quarters of testing in the raw water in the river, so we've done 2 of those so far. And we're actually testing for 22 different chemicals in that family. 6 are regulated, or 5 by the EPA ruling. We've not had a detection to date on that so far. So far we're good. And I'm not quite sure what happens if you eventually detect some. What does that mean to you? Because even at the detection limit, there's margin for error. So we'll have to see how that goes going forward. But the good news is it doesn't affect us right now. It may not going forward. Next slide, please. This is our usual slide that we show on how water supply is looking for the year. This is the graphic that shows precipitation in the Sacramento River watershed to date. This is as of two days ago. Right now we're at about 95% of average. The way the graph works is the top of the shaded area is the 30-year running average. So we're just slightly below that. And then the other years are wet years and dry years, I guess mostly recent years compared with our current year. But the darker blue line is every day of rain from October 1 through now. Currently just slightly below average. I think with the storm coming this weekend, maybe we end up just above average. So overall, it's looking pretty good. Next. Take a quick look at the two large reservoirs on the Sacramento system, Lake Oroville. It's always true in these slides that the top of the shaded area is the average, the long-term average. The solid blue line on top is the full reservoir capacity at like 3.5 million acre feet. The dark blue line is every day of water storage beginning October 1. Oroville has been above average every day since the water year started. You can see the water level started going up as we get into January through March timeframe, and then went down a couple of times. And that's because Oroville actually had been doing flood releases. They were releasing water from the reservoir to make storage for storms coming in. They've now stopped doing that, and they'll let the reservoir fill up to completely full or close to it as the snow starts melting. Next. Lake Shasta looks pretty similar. It's been above average the whole year so far. Again, in February timeframe, they did drop the water level a bit. That also was because of flood releases to make storage available. But they're pretty close. They're at about 4.3 million acre feet today, compared with 4.5 million total. So they're very close to being completely full. Quite likely will reach 100% full before they start going back down again. Next slide, please. This slide looks at the snowpack levels in the Sierras. There's three different graphics. One of them is the northern Sierra, kind of up by Shasta. The next one is central, like Lake Tahoe area, and the third one is south, like Mammoth Lakes area, down there. So on all three of them, we're looking pretty healthy. In the northern Sierra, about 121% of average. The other two, basically just over 100% of average. So overall, snowpack looks really well. The reservoirs look really well. Average overall precipitation, we're in one of those rare, very average years. And if you look at California precipitation over the past 100 years, we don't get average years. This is a rare event to actually get the average. But what that means for us all together, it means that I think that we have a pretty normal year, or average year in water supply. Not a lot of really challenges for us this year. We've already been notified that it is a regular Shasta year, meaning we get all 10,000 acre feet of our CVP water right. I think with the snowpack being healthy and reservoirs being relatively full, Term 91 curtailment probably will happen this summer, but I don't think it'll happen until probably late June, maybe even early July, depending on how the snow melts and if we get any late season storms that come in. So I'm thinking it may be actually kind of a normal 3 to 4 month curtailment, of which our 10,000 acre feet doesn't really result in any supply reductions to the partners. So I think this summer, the partners should be able to receive all the water that they need or request up to the contract limits. One other thing I'd like to mention before we move on is at the June board meeting, I think I've mentioned it to the board before in the past couple of years, the State Water Resources Control Board is working on what they call unimpaired flows in the Sacramento River. They have a proposal to require 55% of all water that falls in the Sacramento River watershed to go out to the ocean, which would be incredibly detrimental to our water rights and really everyone in the Sacramento River system. There is an alternative plan that has been in the works for probably at least a decade now, basically and this is all under the guise of helping salmon. I think you saw in the news again, salmon fishing is canceled again this year as it was last year. The state's looking for ways to help them. Their approach is to flush the fish out to the ocean faster. The alternative approach is really to feed them. Put them on the floodplains, feed them, make them happy so they make it out to the ocean larger and healthier. So I think at the June board meeting, and this is coming up probably within the next year, there's going to be an ask of our agency to hopefully avoid cutting our water rights, especially senior water, our CVP water right. At the June board meeting, I've invited Thad Bettner. He's the executive director of the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors Group. He's been very involved in this, so he'll come to our board meeting with a presentation, kind of lay out what the state's trying to do, what the alternative plan is to do, just to give you a good look ahead as what's coming in the world of water rights. Any questions on that before we move on?
Question?
I try to be uplifting, but then I just couldn't be.
Well, you kind of gave that information pretty quickly, you know, some of it has to be absorbed. So the bottom line is our water rights are potentially under threat as the state reevaluates the distribution and allocation of water in the Sacramento River because of salmon. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. If they've looked at it, and if they do the 55% unimpaired flows that actually implemented it, the result would be that in most years, Shasta has 2 million acre feet less water in it. So the capacity of Shasta is 4.5 million acre feet. They would let the water go and not be in Shasta. All of the Sac River Settlement Contractors' water rights in aggregate is 2.2 million acre feet. So I think that's the one that's primarily at risk with this approach.
All right. I presume it's going to be a while this is all being talked about.
Yeah, the conversations have already been going on for several years, and the governor has actually been involved with it, and there's a pretty large group of people that's been working on it. Everyone on the Sac River system and on the state side itself, the Bureau of Reclamation is engaged, Department of Water Resources is as well. So it's a pretty large group working on it, and that's why I'd like to have Thad Bettner come here next and kind of walk through the whole process and background with this group.
Is there a point at which we need to issue a letter stating our point of view?
Not us issuing a letter. Depending on how it goes, we'll probably be asked to enter into an agreement to do something, and what that something is still being worked on.
All right.
But I think it's coming up. It's coming up within the next year or so that decisions will need to be made.
It's the velvet glove. In other words, you will enter into this agreement.
Potentially.
Well, thank you. Keep us informed. Questions, colleagues? Nope. All right. That brings us over to...
One more quick slide. So in terms of long-term water supply development, as you know, we've been doing short-term agreements with South Sutter Water District, option agreements for winter months, and then 2 years ago, we actually transferred quite a bit of water from them for summer months. So we've been talking with them about doing a long-term agreement. These short-term agreements end up being quite a bit of work. We need to do environmental document, and most times, and then there's just to review the agreements and then state approval ultimately. Both parties would like to do a long-term agreement, and so we'll begin working on that this year. One thing that we'll need to do is a larger environmental document. We still need to work through, is that a M&D, is it a EIR addendum or a different EIR? What that process is exactly we'll look at, and I think it will also depend on what type of agreement we do with South Sutter's Water District. This past year, we did a reservoir reoperation agreement. And past years, we did a groundwater substitution, so it kind of depends on which way we end up going with that. But the plan is to begin work on that this year and then bring something to the board as soon as we can on that.
I think we'll pause a moment while we work out a technical problem. This happened at the council the other night. We had a black screen for a while. I think the clerk did something magical. There it is. Thank you, everybody. Does anybody know what you did?
All right. Next slide. We're back. All right, so thanks, Tim. So pictures in front of you, you got capital improvements we looked at. So it says 8 of 10 screens have been replaced at the intake. The picture to the right, obviously, is some of those being, one of the new ones being put down in. Actually, 7 of 10 have been replaced. They did discover that one was bowed too much to be able to put the blank behind it. So those last 3 are waiting for river conditions to settle down so that we can get the divers in, put the screen in place, so that the national fisheries are comfortable with our plan to prevent salmon and other fish from getting into the intake. Also, something that's been on our list for quite a while, the screen cleaner wire that runs the brushes back and forth along the screens. We had been mentioning that that was frayed and out of alignment. You can see that to the left. That wiring was replaced last month. So now we have nice, clean wires that hopefully won't fray to the extent that you've seen there on the left. So that's been a long time coming. I think that's a testament to Jacobs putting a lot more horsepower behind our facility than necessarily we had seen in a number of the other years, so positive. We still do have a number of things ongoing. The erosion control project, we are doing everything we can to get that done this summer, working with RD 2035. We also have the safe roof access, which I've talked about before, and then also continued access to the screen cleaner for ongoing maintenance with the bearings and the wiring itself. Out at the plant, we meet with Jacobs. We do have a capital projects list. These are some of those odds and ends around the plant. that we have identified that could use either design improvements from the original build or equipment and other improvements that we've talked about as a group. At this point, other than the R&R replacement funds, which you'll see in the budget a little bit in the next item, there's no additional cost at this point that the agency has been asked to contribute. Okay. Slide you're very familiar with, so we're around 13 million gallons a day there in March. You can see the splits between the three. Drinking water contract requirements were all met. As usual, all of the reports are posted to the agency website, and we are under our normal water right. Very, very nice winter we've had, so we suspect the Term 91 won't be in effect probably till at least July, if I had to guess. We did, just as a note with the plant, we have in the past few weeks had a couple more power bumps. One which took the plant down for about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes here just a few days ago. So as a reminder, we are doing a distributed energy resources design currently underway. We're looking at that PDR right now. That includes, their scope includes funding mechanisms, so we are looking at grants and other programs to fund this. It's probably going to be about a $7 to $8 million effort, all said and done. There will be a little bit you'll see in the budget forecast for that as well, but we are looking for grant funding for the majority of that. And then they are looking at talking with vendors because some of those things, the batteries and whatnot, are very long lead time at this point, right? High demand. Okay. And that's it for ops. So I'll take a few of those. So we're around 1 megawatt in that range, and that varies obviously by the amount of water we're producing and varies for time of year. When it comes to the power over time, trying to recall, should have wrote the questions down. When we're talking about power over time and the power produced here, part of that assessment is looking at, we have WAPA that we have a requirement for roughly 20%, 18% as a base load. So we're not going to be powering 100% with our renewable here. That's not the goal. I don't know the exact size of the battery system now because, again, it depends on your control strategies, what you want to size for. So it's not just put in as much solar as you can, because if you're not going to effectively use it, you don't want to spend that capital. So it's more, if we're going to run the battery during certain times, the solar feeding into that, is the solar charging the battery, is the solar feeding into the plant? All of that has to be massaged and mixed before we understand what the actual design capacity and parameters would be. So that'll be coming forward. We'll definitely provide that. And then as far as long-term look, going to WAPA, we're gonna fiscally be better off. We know that versus PG&E, at least for the power we do take from WAPA. The numbers we've put out have been anywhere from 20 to 30% that we think will save in power costs coming in off the normal distribution lines. Again, that'll vary too because WAPA has to buy power frequently, so you're paying their market demand for some of that. And then again, the control strategy is really going to play into if we do have peak demands that we have to pay for WAPA. Do we use the battery during that period of time, right? Is the solar, during the day, do we use solar plus battery and then only use WAPA at night, right? Those are all the questions we still have to answer.
I would just emphasize the importance of some of these questions for what other jurisdictions are trying to do. Mm-hmm. So I think this is tremendously exciting for me, and I think for people all over the state who are thinking about how to implement microgrids at scale. So I'd really love to hear some of this fiscal.
Absolutely. We'll be bringing that information forward. Absolutely.
Yes, yes it is. Yes, yeah, this is our budget overview for the fiscal 24-25 budget. The first one, you do have in your packet, I should mention that first, is that you do have the budget slides in your packet in front of you. So the first slide we're going to go through is where we are in time, our current year budget. It says mid-year budget on the slide, but really the mid-year budget is the same one that was adopted last year in June. We did not make any changes this year in January. So let's kind of look at where we are point in time today and where we think we're going to end up at the end of the fiscal year, at the end of June. Our 6 main categories, 100 is operation and maintenance. That's everything related to treating and delivering drinking water to the partners. That includes the Jacobs contract, the Sage Tom Hill contract. We're tracking that we'll probably end the year close to $1 million under budget. That is pretty typical for us when we do the budget for the year. We don't want to under budget how much water we think we're going to use. So we look at what do we think water right and water right restrictions may be, how much will the partners use, and then multiply that water demand across all the different cost categories and see what we end up with. At the end of the year, we don't ever want to be under, we don't want to ever underbid ourselves essentially and end up short on funds. So that's pretty typical for us that we end the year with some budget left over in that category. The second category is operation and maintenance, and that's basically everything that our team does to make sure that the design, build, operate team is doing their job correctly. So that one we're ending very close. We're about $40,000 under budget, which is basically balanced. Permits and water supply, we are a bit under budget, mainly because we didn't do certain things last year because it was a wet year. The following slides do kind of walk through these items, so I'll kind of go through the detail a little bit, next couple of slides. Agency administration, and that's Dan and myself, insurance, a few other things. Basically, we're on track for budget for that, slightly under. Operational contingency, this is something we carry forward in every budget. Basically, it's a contingency in case something happens. We have to date not actually used it. So that is unspent, so we have not used that budget this year. SRF debt and reserve payments, these are consistent every year. We spend 100% of that money on our loan payments every year. So overall net, we're tracking about 1.6 million under budget.
Remind me, if you will, how long the SRF payments go out.
Woodland's portion of the SRF payment is 20 years, and Davis is 30 years.
Thank you.
There, also on the Woodland side, Woodland has a reserve payment. We have to pay 10% of the loan amount over, I think it was 10 years. And so we're getting Woodland's getting close to having a bit of cut in their payment, as that reserve is paid off over 10 years. So we're actually getting close to 10 years already, so that one will drop off. So I think that's about $600,000 a year, roughly, that one is, so it'll drop to about 10 million at that point.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides walk through how do we end up where we are. Overall, a good thing. We're about $540,000 under budget for electricity. We did factor in PG&E's rate increase last year. That was 10%. There was a 10% increase again January this year. There's another one coming later on this year. I don't know exactly when or the amount. So that 540 may shrink a little bit by the time we get to the end of the year. And also a reduction of about $100,000 in pass-through chemical cost. Part of that is driven by Woodland's ASR, Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program. Woodland started injecting late in the year. They started injecting in December versus November, and actually stopped injecting about a month ago. So Woodland's ASR program is actually very healthy water storage, and they reached the point that they could not store more water. Well, they could, but then they wouldn't be able to recover that water. So they actually stopped injecting, which then reduces the amount of water the water treatment plant is producing and then saves us budget, essentially. The next category that we're under is supplemental water purchase. That's because we did not do a water purchase this year. We did the option agreement with Southside Water District, but did not need to exercise that. So we saved that money. And there's several other task items that were just slightly under budget. So overall, another $50,000 or so that were under budget. The 200 series category O&M oversight, we're overall about 40,000 under. There's a lot of relatively small dollar amount items in that category, and we're just slightly under on all of them. That added up to about 40,000. Next slide, please. The permits and water supply, the 300 series, we're about 200,000 under. Again, it's because The water right transfer we did with South Sutter Water District for an option agreement this fall actually went very smoothly. It was very straightforward. So we underspent on that one, and then we did not need to do much investigation because it all went smoothly and ultimately didn't need to use it. That's also the same reason why the 400 series is under budget, because we didn't use agency legal counsel nearly as much because water transfer agreement was easy. And so those all kind of go together. And the contingency, again, we have not used it. We do not expect to use that this year. And then finally, sorry, now setting a 24-25 budget, sorry. We have two real cost categories, O&M, which is everything related to operation of our facilities, and then the debt and reserve payments. And kind of walking through that real quickly, this is the same format as the first graphic that we had. Our current year budget, next year's proposed budget, and then the difference that we're projecting, and then the next couple of slides kind of walk through them in more detail. So our current year budget is about $9.5 million. We're proposed for next year budget 10.29, so an increase of about $820,000. O&M oversight, the 200 series category, basically flat. We're not projecting any change to that one. Permits and water supply, there is a bit of an increase, about $400,000, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to start working towards a long-term water transfer agreement so that we don't have to do these annual transfers every year anymore. Agency administration, there's a bit of an increase, about $50,000 increase. In operational contingency, no change, and then debt and reserve payment, no change. Kind of the reasons why we ended up here. Is there a question?
Tim, yeah. I still want to get a handle on the SRF debt.
Mm-hmm.
Woodland and Davis each did their own individual borrowing. Are those consolidated for the purpose of this item, and does the agency pay it and get reimbursed as part of the calculation from the cities?
Yes, yeah, so there's...
That's all I needed to know.
Yeah, there's two different, well, there's actually, it's fairly complicated. So Woodland and Davis each have their own separate SRF loans that the city pays for, and that's for the local facilities that were needed to support the regional project. Both cities also have SRF loans that the agency pays for, and that's added together on this screen for the regional facilities. So there's kind of two different, that's maybe why it's confusing, because there's two different sets of SRF loans, ones that the cities pay for and the agency pays for the other one.
What we're seeing here is only the agency's portion of the SRF debt.
Yeah, correct, only the agency's portion. So it's Woodland's 20-year regional loan and Davis's 30-year regional loan. Okay. And the cities separately pay for their local.
$10.66 million for the two of us, plus our independent.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, and the only other addition that Tim mentioned, and this is about $500,000 a year of that is the reserve payment that Woodland is making, which ends in a year or two. So that will go down a little bit for Woodland, but Davis pays like $3.8 million of that annually for the debt service portion that we're due.
Thank you. Just trying to get a handle on it, give it in consciousness.
So kind of walking through what's proposed in the 24-25 budget. Overall, the O&M category is about $820,000 higher than last year. Some of the bigger changes are the fixed O&M portion. We have the amount that we pay Jacobs or CH2M Hill for operations. There's a fixed component and a variable component. The fixed component is the cost of treating water, the cost of operating the facilities, the labor, that kind of stuff. And then the variable cost is dependent on how much water that we use. So our projection of how much water we're using the next fiscal year results in that. Part of it's cost escalation in the contract, and part of it's just what we think we're going to be needing for water deliveries. There's a bit of an increase in pass-through chemical costs. We are still in a high inflationary period, and chemical costs seem to track higher than overall inflation does. We did add $400,000 to cover the joint intake erosion control project. I think we'll actually come in quite a bit less than that, but that's budget's in there in case the agency has to take it over instead of RD 2035. Our approach is to have RD 2035 execute the project, and then we pay them our share versus the other way around. But that's in case we take it over. One item of actual decrease, and I can maybe help answer some of the WAPA questions. We're actually showing a bit of a decrease in electrical cost compared to our current budget year, and that's because on January 1, we switched to WAPA. And WAPA should be 30% or so lower in total cost than PG&E, although calculating it for budget purposes is quite a bit more complicated. With PG&E's rates, you have a rate, and then you multiply that by how much you're using, you get a dollar amount. WAPA billing is not quite that way. It's a lot more of an à la carte type system that we actually have 3 different power supply agreements. We have base load, exchange, and custom product. Those have 3 different rates. And the base we have to use every year, which is why we couldn't do 100% solar. We have to pay for that regardless of whether or not we use it. The other 2 we could use or not use, but those unit rates are actually quite low. But what they also do is they have several fixed charges. We pay for transmission as a lump sum cost. We pay for the scheduling people in the office separately. There's about 4 or 5, correct me if I'm wrong, separate charges that we get later on that are essentially like lump sum charges, not usage charges. So it makes it a little bit more complicated when we're used to just charging, you know, how much power we use times the rate and we're done. Now we have to factor in what we think the lump sum charges are going to be in addition to the lower rates. But overall, it should be quite a bit less expensive, and we'll get a lot more engaged with that with WAPA as we go forward because we're getting close to the actual switchover date. The other thing we've requested is, and that may be a final budget item, is getting our own separate meter at the joint intake. Right now, the joint intake is on WAPA Power. We have 1 meter that we share with RD 2035, and every month we spend quite a bit of money splitting the bill, so to speak. Because of these charges, you have to go back and look at 2 or 3 months prior to figure out who used what electricity when. It's kind of like in college, the roommates split the bills, but we're doing that for our intake facility. So we've requested WAPA to install a meter for just us, and then we wouldn't have to do that anymore, and that will cost some money. They haven't given us a budget yet for that, but we may try to do that to avoid having to split the cost every year. Moving on to O&M oversight category. Oh, sorry.
One more thing. So the last question on the DER was when we might actually see some facilities. So definitely not this budget cycle coming up, but I think for the next one, we would probably end up starting to project some savings with some of that effort. So I think we're at least a year from putting stuff on the ground at this point.
Sorry. Oh, no problem. Moving on to the O&M and oversight category, basically the projections are the same as currently this year. We're not planning on making any changes. We have consolidated some tasks. As I mentioned earlier, we had quite a few rather small dollar amount tasks. Some of them we never even used. We just kind of consolidated them so we don't have so many numbers, so many line items. Permits and water supply, we're projecting about $400,000 higher than this year, mainly because we know that we need a more intense environmental document for a long-term supply contract. That may change as we refine what do we actually need to do. Do we need an EIR? Do we just do an addendum? Do we do a mitigated negative declaration? All those have very different costs to put together. So we put $500,000 in the budget to basically, as a placeholder, we know we need to refine this number further. It should not be higher than that, but EIRs are expensive to do if we have to do that separately. We did, some of the things that reduce cost is we're not really anticipating that we need to do any water purchases this year, at least through the summer months, possibly in winter, if it ends up being a dry winter coming up, but at least through summer, we're not planning on any water transfers. And then so we also reorganize the same thing, we kind of fix some of our line items a bit on that. 400 series are a little bit higher, $45,000 higher than this year, mainly driven by insurance costs. We're expecting another large increase in insurance costs this year as we have the past couple years experienced. Everything else is basically the same. Contingency, we're not planning on changing that. We don't charge the partners for contingency. What we've been doing for the past few years now is just simply rolling that same money over. It stays in the agency's bank account, and we just don't use it until at some point there's a need to. So it doesn't show up on the partners' charges. Debt reserve payments are unchanged. That's the same $10.66 million as it has been for the past 8 years and will continue to be for a few more years.
Quick question about insurance. What kind of risks are we insuring against? If somebody gets sick because they drink our water, is that it?
No, it's more our facilities. It's more the intake in the regional water treatment facility and then our pipelines. I think it's probably more akin to homeowners insurance. Probably more akin to homeowners insurance, but just with much more expensive facilities.
Maybe if one of our workers gets injured and sues us?
Could be that. Although we have a DBO contract, so I don't know that we would actually be liable for that. I think it's more like if there's a fire and fire damages something, or if there's a flood that damages something.
I guess what I'm wondering is, at some point in time, self-insurance becomes a prospect. We have a $10 million reserve in this agency. I mean, unless we have a bomb dropped on us or a meteorite hits us, you know, we're not talking about the whole facility being destroyed. We've already had a couple incidents. We didn't have to have a claim on either of those, though, did we? Right, so what I'm wondering is, a lot of people are taking on more of their own liability rather than insuring it because the cost of insurance has gotten so expensive. I just suggest to staff that you might want to think about that.
Yeah, and the other thing that we looked into a few years ago, and I think there's different people now that maybe I can get a different answer this time, is Aqua has a JPIA insurance program for a joint powers agency insurance program that we may be able to join. And I asked them about 5 years ago, and they said no, because the agency is backed by cities.
Because it's what?
Because the agency is backed by cities.
What difference does that make?
I have no idea.
No,
They couldn't give me an answer to it.
You have YC Parmea in this county. Are they not interested in covering us?
We are part of YC Premier. That's our insurance carrier currently.
That's the premium we're paying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so in essence, we are self-insuring now with YC Parmea. Yeah, so, but part of that is you're the collective, so if a city has a large legal challenge or other challenge or payout, if you will, you know, that's part of that collective pool at that point, so.
I don't want to belabor this.
Sure.
It's just, I think everybody I know of is rethinking insurance because the rates are going up and in many cases astronomically. $42,000 doesn't seem like a whole lot of money given the scope of the agency, but it's still real money. All right, please continue.
So I think that's the end of the presentation. I can take any questions that you may have, and then the next step that we'll have is we will fine tune the budget and then bring it back to the board in June for consideration.
Well, just to clarify, because you just said 40, but is the total insurance is 223 a year? Is that, okay. Just
Yes,
making
we're
sure
thinking it may go to 275 or so.
that's 42, okay.
Yeah, 42,000 increase over the $250,000 or so we're already paying.
You know, that isn't even a big increase relative to what I'm seeing elsewhere, where people's insurance is doubling and tripling. 42,000 is basically, what, 20% of 240,000? So. Colleagues, any additional questions? UC Davis must have a question. No, you don't? Okay, all right. All right, well, where do we go from here? That's item 4. We've had the overview. We're scheduled to meet in June. We'll hopefully adopt a budget in June. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we'll bring any refinements in June. And then, like Tim mentioned, there may be 1 or 2 additions that we don't quite have nailed down yet, so.
Okay. Now, does Kim help with the preparation of the budget? Not much? Then I won't say thank you. Or only thank you a little. All right. All right, thank you. That concludes item 4 for today.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, we'll see that again in June. We move on to item 5, consider adoption of resolution 2024-02 approving agency document retention policy.
I'm here to earn my keep, so good afternoon. Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency is an independent agency, and one of the things that you have not had and need to have under the California Public Records Act and other laws is a records management policy. So this has been talked about for a while, and it's finally here in front of you. So basically, you know, we talked internally at the staff level about this. There was some thought that maybe we try to use one of the city's existing records management policies as a base, but you're really an enterprise utility agency and more like our typical water agency clients that we service. So what ultimately we did was take another client's similar policy and adapt it for the agency. So what you have before you is a much more truncated and easy to understand, easy to use policy than you would see if you had your city hat on, because you don't have things like law enforcement, public works, libraries, all those things where you'd have to cover all of that. You basically are a one-stop wholesale water supplier, so the scope of records is going to be much more discrete, and that's what this policy represents. And the records retention schedule that's appended to it is intended to just scope according to what you actually do as Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency. So it's before you today with a resolution. That's actually required if you want to manage your records and be able to do things, for example, like turn them, if they're paper, into electronic documents. At some point, when the records no longer serve a purpose, to be able to destroy them. The government code actually requires that you adopt a resolution in order to be able to implement that authority. So that's why that's here on top of the policy. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, why aren't all of them just permanent? It seems like this data is not that expensive to store.
You know, I mean, this is your policy. If you wanted to retain everything, you could. But there's a lot of ephemeral records, things like contracts. Once you've terminated a contract with a contractor or a consultant, after a certain amount of time, you know, there is a period you want to keep them because of the statute of limitations in case there's any legal dispute or those kinds of things. But after that, the likelihood that you're ever going to go back to it and look at it again is pretty minimal. So, you know, even electronic systems have a finite amount of storage, and so this is an attempt to just make sure that you have a clean record and that you're only really keeping those documents that are important to the agency as a permanent record.
Yeah. I'm just asking from the perspective, you know, I know that video and audio storage is expensive. It's very expensive. But the kinds of documents we see here, I'm really just thinking from a perspective of maybe this is a model agency and things go really well, and 10 years from now, researchers want to look and see how this agency did. Really, I'm a researcher by profession, so it pains me a little bit just to see data being destroyed without a compelling reason. But I'm not going to push the point, but just if data's not that expensive, why not just keep it, you know?
Well, and, you know, Director Vaitla, I would just say the four of you sitting up there, this is really your document at the end of the day. And if there's an interest in retaining everything as an electronic record permanently, that's certainly something you can direct us to do, and we can bring this back with a modified retention schedule if that's the board's pleasure.
Well, I noticed two things here, of course, that the general manager or the designee may destroy and discard by any permanent method that protects, so there's an element of discretion there at the general manager level, I see as this is written, and also that this policy shall be reviewed at least every 3 years. So run for re-election.
Here's a compromise proposal. How about this, just adding a passage that says, the manager will discard records if there are compelling fiscal reasons to do so, or data capacity storage reasons to do so on the retention schedule.
Okay, you're offering an amendment.
It's not that important to me, honestly, guys, so if you want to move on and go home, that's fine with me too, but it seems like no reason to destroy things that we don't need to, in my view, if there's no cost implications or really data management implications.
Is there an average amount of time that folks or agents like ours normally keep this information?
You know, what you see here, Director Chapman, is pretty typical of what clients do. And, you know, again, for records that we kind of consider ephemeral, things other than your formation documents, your as-built plans, those kinds of things, they have a useful life once a matter's over, or contract's terminated. You want to keep them for at least, you know, what I would call a legal period to make sure that if something gets discovered and there's a dispute, you can bring a action within that time against the contractor or whatever, but, you know, after that statute of limitations is run, it's just a matter of, are you ever gonna look at this contract again? Or, you know, if it's an engineering contract, you're gonna keep the engineering documents longer because they're an operational issue, but you don't necessarily need the piece of paper by which you employed that consultant. So, you know, what's here is kind of what would be typical, at least among our clients.
And is there a magnitude, does it cost any more to save it longer? Why does it matter if we keep it, or what's the downside to keeping it longer?
Nothing necessarily, and, you know, and particularly for an agency like yours, you have a very discrete number of records and a very discrete scope of what those records are. I mean, it's just, how much stuff do you need, even if it's electronic, if you're never going to use it again? It's really a policy issue, and, you know, again, I don't mean to punt, but this is really something for the four of you to decide, and, you know, Tim and Stan may have some input on this as well.
Yeah, I would just offer, so it's not necessarily from a space perspective, certainly with this agency. Cities might have a different view because of the amount of records that are produced with the city, you know, for the other areas that we don't have. But for me, it's more a perspective of eventually it gets to a point where, you know, if we do get a PRA, you know, trying to find some of those records, right, it's that data management gets, even in a small area, gets kind of cumbersome, you know. The majority of the records, we did this when we were looking through what kind of generated this was we updated our website. And we had a lot of documents on there, and that generated the discussion. We haven't poked at these for years. Do they really need to be kept, you know, moving forward? To the point of, if there's research, whatnot, I can certainly respect, you know, that people might want to look at that. But, you know, we know the hits that we've seen on these documents, and most of them were just, you know, to that point is we didn't put them back on the website. They're still in our files, but for me, it's cumbersome to continue to maintain all of those moving forward in a concise way that Michelle can find them easily if we do get a PRA or other need, right? So, I don't know if you have any.
Let's let Rich ask his question, and then Tim wants to weigh in.
Easy question, Josh. I'm assuming this complies with PRA.
Yes, it does.
I did notice there was something here, I'm trying to find it, that the agency has the ability, if it's considered historical in some nature, that we could save it anyways.
Sure.
So, but I'm trying to find that language. Who made the call that it's historical? The general manager or the board?
Yeah, that's the intention. The general manager or his designee as the custodian would be the one that ultimately makes that call.
No, that's a great point, Director. And there's a miscellaneous section that says, other records designated as of significant historical value by board. It says permanent. So I'm glad I wasn't intending to advance an amendment already, but glad to not do that, and instead just make sure that that's board and general manager, or general manager there would be fine with me. Because I think the board realistically won't consider these decisions. Tim probably doesn't care about the historical value of any of this, but maybe you do. Especially if we build a microgrid that's a model for other agencies, that kind of thing, you know, you might not want to bring it back to the board and instead just save it, you know?
Yeah, there's quite a bit that we would always save. Of course, all of our foundational documents, all of our agreements with RD 2035, Conaway Ranch.
Specifications.
Our plans and specifications, all of our as-built, all of our SRF documents are required to be saved for the life of the loan. So there's certain things that have, especially that we have to keep. I think we have a storage room full of paper documents that we have not looked at since we moved them over there about 8 years ago. We're not trying to go through that because I don't really want to do that. But so there's certain things that we may over time, you know, want to get rid of just because why do we still have this thing from 10 years ago? But there's quite a bit that we either legally could never get rid of or we just wouldn't want to. I can tell you my city position, and we got into a lawsuit where I had to go back and try to find things from 100 years ago. Actually found some things from 100 years ago. And that we had kept those that long. So there's certain things that we would most certainly keep forever. Just because, well, you never know when you need to go back to something.
You know, I'd like to suggest alternative language. Maybe in section 300.5 record disposal, just added this introductory, while destruction is not mandated, comma, then the general manager or the designee may destroy, discard, et cetera, based on the retention period. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. And then in that miscellaneous section, maybe other records designated as of significant historical value by board or general manager would be.
Go ahead and call attention to the specific.
Yeah, it's in the table on
Oh, okay.
page
Five.
5, correct, at the bottom of page 5 under miscellaneous.
Other records designated as of significant historical value by the board
Or general manager. I just can't see that this would come back.
or
to-
DM. Okay, those two amendments are proposed. With the language with the amendments.
I'll second.
Do you have that clearly, Josh?
Yes, I do, yeah.
All right, we have a motion by Director Landsberg,
I'll second.
second by Director Vatla. Any additional questions or discussion? Any member of the public wish to comment? Oh, come on, please. All right, nobody on the phone. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You know, as I'm sitting here thinking this, I thought, I've been on the Woodland City Council 13 years. I've never looked at our retention policy there or had an occasion to ever consider it. So I'm sure you Davis people are discussing it every Tuesday night.
Chair Stallard? Sorry, can you repeat who did the motions? Because I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're not coming
Cannot
over
hear
the
the motion?
microphone. Yeah, I didn't get who made the motion, and so I don't know if the
Oh,
recording
Director
picked it up because I
Landsberg?
can't hear you.
Director Landsberg made the motion, and Director Vatla seconded the motion. And did you get the actual amendment language? I think Josh did. He
I
can
have it.
perhaps help you on that. And thank you. Just raise your hand anytime you can't hear me, okay? That's all right.
And if I can just add one thing real quickly. For whatever it's worth, we keep everything, so if there was ever a problem, Tim, Stan, Michelle, or whoever comes after them could always reach out to us. Because we don't have a
You
CPRA,
speak as though
so
you are permanent and forever.
the
We can-
firm will be.
We hope you will be, and we hope the firm is, but firms dissolve and change too. All right, thank you so much. We appreciate the service, and that brings us on to item 6, the long-range board calendar. Tim?
Yes, yep, our next regular meeting is June 20th. At that meeting, we have our usual GMs and ops update, final budget, and then also it's time again for selection of chair and vice chair, and then our usual consultant contracts consideration. There's 2 other things I'd like to add. One of them is having a guest speaker, Thad Bettner from Sac River Settlement Contractors Group, and then also potentially, if it gets done in time, is the agreement with the City of Sacramento. It's the Memorandum of Understanding for the 2025 Sacramento River Sanitary Survey Update, which is a 3rd time that we're doing that one. Every 5 years, the State Water Board requires all water utilities on surface water to do a survey of their watershed to make sure that, you know, the water quality in the river is still good. What we've been doing 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and again now, is we're partnering with the City of Sacramento and Placer County Water Agency, Sac County Water Agency, City of West Sacramento, and I'm forgetting 1 or 2. There's 6 of us. East Bay Mud is in there, and there's 6 of us all together that our water treatment intakes are all basically close to each other in the river, that instead of each of us doing our own report for about $250,000, we do one together and split the cost 6 ways. So that's what we're doing. So I have the draft memo now. I sent it to Josh, I think yesterday, to review, and then if that's done by the group, we would bring it back to the board at the June meeting for consideration. I think that's their plan. But we're one of 6 agencies that has to review it and get back to them with comments.
All right. Questions on staff on that one? Thank you for that. All right, board member comments. Director Landsberg, can we count on you for a comment? No, not today. How about UC Davis? No comment, all right. And City of Davis? Everybody's happy, nobody's complaining about the water? That's good. And, you know, I think we can all be proud of what this agency has accomplished. It's, impressive. Are we in year 6 now? He's year 7.
We're about to start year 8. Yeah, so we're currently in year 7, almost to year 8 already.
Well, we all remember the scar tissue that developed over the process to get us this agency, but obviously we're doing good, and I honestly don't think we could ask for better management, gentlemen and friends, to be at this place and to have navigated the challenges of technology and contractors and everything else and be where we are. It's something we can all be very grateful for and proud of. So thank you for that. With that, we are adjourned until Thursday, June 20th, 2024. That meeting I see is also scheduled to be here in these chambers. All right, with that, thank you, colleagues, we're adjourned.